Good morning. Thank you, Lacey, for the introduction, and that's enough about me. We're here to hear from these guys, so without further ado, we will have candidate opening remarks, 2 minutes each from each of the gentlemen who are running for district attorney, and we're going to start with Mr. Collin Sim. 2 minutes.
Thank you so much for having us this morning. I grew up in this neighborhood. This is where I'm from. I went to St. Paul's High School, graduated from there, went to Mississippi College on a leadership scholarship to play football, where I met my wife. We've been together since we were 19. We've been married for 18 years. We have 3 kids that are 16, 15, and 13. And we made sure that we were going to raise our kids, talk to my wife about my experience living here and growing up here. This is the place we want to be our home. This is the place that I've come back home to fight for. At 25 years old, I went to law school at Loyola. At 25, I became an assistant DA in New Orleans, where I spent time in a felony division of court running dockets, prosecuted individually 1,000+ felons, and tried about sub 40 felony jury trials by the time I was 27. Murders, rapes, sex cases, arson, fraud, you name it, I've done it. And I taught a junior attorney how to do that right behind me along the way. At 27, I became one of the youngest assistant United States attorneys in the country, where I learned from experts how to prosecute gangs, violent crime, child exploitation across this country. I've done probably 56 different wiretaps. I've learned how to build task forces and focused on violent conduct and hotspots and dismantle violent drug trafficking organizations. I teach that to other federal prosecutors. I teach state police detectives how to testify and how to write reports. In 2015, I took a job for Mr. Montgomery to be his criminal chief for the last 9 years, where I've supervised the prosecution of 27,000 felons, maintained a 90% conviction rate. And for those who abuse our kids, we convict the abusers 95.6% of the time. We converted a failing domestic violence department that had a 48% arrest to conviction rate to now an 87% arrest to conviction rate, convicting more than 200 more batterers per year with the same number of cases submitted. Mr. Montgomery taught this office that a good man can make a difference. You do your job, and you only do your job, and you don't exploit this office. You lead from the front, and my experience allows me to do that. I'll never let this office go backwards. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Wynne.
Sure, Vincent, Wynne. I too grew up in this neighborhood. I actually lived in Covenant Country Club right at these streets. I'm very familiar with it. Went to Mandeville High School, went to LSU, went to Loyola, graduated from Loyola, and had an opportunity to work at the district attorney's office, wherein I was in charge of 4 of the 8 sections in that office. And in doing so, I learned how to handle people. I learned how to try cases. I've tried north of 400 cases while I was at the district attorney's office. When I left the DA's office in 2006, I formed the firm of Wynne, Goo, and Labello. We practiced together for almost 18 years till my partner Vinny left for the bench and is now a sitting judge in Division F. My platform is pretty simple. I'm going to be a strong but fair DA. I'm going to prosecute violent criminals. I'm going to make sure that domestic violence abusers are put to the test and they're given the sentences they need. But I'm going to be a fair district attorney. I understand that not everybody that commits a crime needs to go to jail, and that we have diversion practices. We have issues with specialty courts that we can put those people in it. I'm also going to be a fiscally responsible DA. And I've said this on the campaign trail repeatedly. I have run a business, my law firm, for 26 years. I know what it means to make payroll. I know what it means to run a business. And I'm committed today to tell you that I am not going to ask for a tax as your next DA. We have plenty of opportunity in that office and monies to do what we need to. I think we need to lean up the office and move forward. And lastly, I'm going to be an accessible and accountable DA. I'm going to be in Franklinton. I'm going to be in Covington. I'm going to be in Slidell. And importantly, I'm going to reopen the office in Bogalusa, one of our worst crime areas in this district, to make sure that we have a full-service office up there. And so I want to be accountable to the people. How else does a DA understand what needs to be happening in this community if he's not out there meeting with people? I bring a business acumen to an office that I think needs that. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. So now we're going to start individual questions. These were questions that were come up with by chamber members, not me, but they do fit in. Mr. Wynne's answer kind of segues perfectly into number one. So Mr. Wynne, this question is for you, 2 minutes, and then we'll go to Mr. Sims. Question. We understand that the DA's office is mandated by state law to be funded entirely by the parishes they serve. In this race, that being St. Tammany and Washington. Can you explain the annual budgetary requirement for the DA's office, and is there in fact a shortfall, and if so, how do you plan to address it?
Well, obviously, I don't work there, so I don't know the actual answer to that. But I can tell you, it's not just a parish function. There are warrants as well. There's 33 of them. Those bring a certain amount of money to the DA's office. The DA's office has a budget, in my opinion, that's north of $14 million. The monies that are being reported are around 10 in their audits. And so there's monies there that I have still not been able to figure out where they are. So the concept that the DA's office does not have sufficient funds, I believe, is not correct. I believe that there are sufficient funds to run that office. As I've said before, we got to lean up that office. We got to make sure that we're doing more with less, because the reality of it is that's what the people want. They want somebody that knows how to run an office and make sure it's being taken care of fiscally and being responsible with it. Thank you.
Absolutely. Mr. Sims, 2 minutes.
I do know how the budget works in the DA's office. I've worked there for 9 years. We have 3 different forms of funding. You have DA revenues that are fines, fees, and tickets, and asset forfeiture and things of that nature. State funding, we have 30, not 33. We have 30 warrants, 31 if you count the DA. For the ADAs, they're about $50,000 a piece. We haven't received an additional warrant from the state of Louisiana in 16 years. This parish has changed fundamentally since then. We receive about $5.5 million from both St. Tammany and Washington Parish in parish funding. An expert from the parish government actually reported, and I've run the criminal department with $3 million less than the average DA's office is similarly situated in the state based upon case volume and population. I've done it for 9 years. I've run this office with $1 million less funding from the parish, and I've run this criminal division with the current funding. I don't need any additional funding. No one's talking about raising taxes. It is not real. I'm not asking for any taxes. I don't need it. I've demonstrated I can run this office with $1 million less, and the parish's own expert says I'm running it with $3 million less than the average. We run an effective and efficient office, and that's how I'm going to continue to do it. We have retained our staff that has 17 years experience on average, and we have to retain good people. There is no leading this office up anymore. We are prosecuting 450 more felons per year than 9 years ago. The DA's office is the same as drainage, public works, schooling, and whatnot. You can't have a DA's office going backwards while the rest of the parish is moving forwards. That would be detrimental to every one of your safety. We can't do that. That's irresponsible. To unfund this office is defunding law enforcement, because their arrests are as only good as our convictions. And you guys deserve a safe place, not anyone playing word games with taxes and budget. We don't need any money. I'm running it effectively now, and I'll continue to do so. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Sims, we're going to ask a question. You'll start this time. And again, it is related to exactly what we just discussed. But the former DA, the late Warren Montgomery, was an advocate for a dedicated funding source for the DA's office. The voters rejected that sales tax in 2022 to provide funding for the office. The question reads, do you favor a dedicated tax or some other funding mechanism? And could you please explain your position? So I think you did some of that, but maybe you could expound.
Ideally, as long as it's not a tax increase and it's a swap from one budgetary line item over the other, I think dedicated funding for a DA's office makes sense as long as it's not a tax increase and it's a swap. You want a DA's office to be in charge of their budget. Every single year, we go to the parish, and depending on the funds available to the parish's general fund, dictates what's available to the other mandated expenses in the parish. I think it makes more sense for the DA's office to be in control of its budget with oversight from the parish, so that there's a checks and balances system in place. But that amount of money should be safeguarded and finite. The other part of that is by having an independent source of money. It becomes very awkward if the DA's office were ever to have to investigate, not that we are, members of parish government, and you have to investigate the same individuals that control your funding source. That creates conflicts. But I do like the oversight with the parish with a dedicated source of funding, as long as it's not an increase and it is a true line item swap that doesn't increase the burden on the taxpayers.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Wynne, 2 minutes.
I'm opposed to any sort of tax and even a dedicated source of funding. Because think about it. It's not just the DA's office that has issues with funding. It's the judges. It's the courthouse, because the sheriff needs funding. And so I don't think it's fair for the DA to stand up, as they did just recently, and ask for a tax and not support the other prior two taxes. Let's be honest. The DA's office, when the other two prior taxes went up, they relaxed. They didn't come out and support it wholeheartedly. I think that's a shame to the judicial system. We've got to support the entirety of that system, and dedicating funds to one entity is not a fair representation, I think, of what the people want. And obviously they spoke. They said unresoundingly no. 65% said we are not going to approve of this. And so I am against a dedicated form of funding. I think there is sufficient funds in that office to operate that office. Again, we've got to trim up the office and figure out where we need to self-generate funds in order to make this work. Thank you.
Thank you. We will go to question number 3, and this will be a question answered first by Mr. Wynne. Has to do with prosecutorial discretion. Specifically, will you use that discretion to reduce prosecutions seeking maximum sentences? And do you support or oppose the practice of accepting plea agreements for lesser sentences based on the ADA's workload?
Obviously, the prosecution has tremendous discretion in what it would like to do. Relative to plea agreements, currently, the office does not allow its section DAs to make those decisions on their own. How do you run dockets when you have to run down the hall every time you have an issue in court? I'm there every day, guys, and get an authority or a memo to someone in order to get that plea deal taken care of. It's not efficient. And you can ask me, and you can ask the people in that court, along with the folks that are there every day, the judges and the retired judges are saying the same thing. There's a reason the dockets are so big. It's because we do not have an efficient system currently. And so, again, we need to give our assistant DAs the ability to make those decisions, and I would do that. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Sims, 2 minutes.
We charge about 3,000 defendants with felonies per year for a range of violations. The ADAs in each division manage those cases. They've also managed 2 years of a COVID backlog and continue to reduce the dockets. The dockets are down 15% since COVID. The same policies have been in place since the beginning of Mr. Montgomery's administration to now. All the way through COVID, the dockets were managed 100% from the same levels that Walter Reed managed them, with charging 300 more felons per year. Now we're charging 400 more felons per year, and we've eaten into the COVID backlog and handled the additional volume and are shrinking the dockets now by more than 15% since COVID. The ADAs, and Mr. Wynne knows this, or he should know this if he wants to be district attorney, because the plea agreement policies are public record. The ADAs and the divisions have autonomy on non-crimes of violence until a defendant becomes a 4-time habitual offender, and they do not have autonomy on sex offenses and murders and rapes. And child cases. Those have to go through a supervisor. And I would hope everyone would want the office to be uniformly handling certain types of cases, regardless of who the prosecutor is, very seriously, and making sure management knows how to handle those cases. The ADAs have 17 years of experience, and depending on their experience, it dictates the level of autonomy that they have. It's got nothing to do with the dockets. The only reason why we're dealing with more docket volume is since COVID. It never happened before that, and we're not going to give away the farm at the DA's offices just to say, ADAs, go deal out all the cases that you want. That would be inconsistent, and it would be unfair to the defendants who, by luck of the draw in each division, would be treated differently by the system as opposed to uniformly by the system, given the same facts and the same criminal history. That would be a problem, and we would breed inconsistency, and ADAs doing cases that are significant just to complete them, as opposed to how the office wants to make sure they're done very effectively and properly for the victims.
Thank you, sir. The fourth question is going to be started by Mr. Sims, and it reads, we are the leader in the state with the highest number of specialty courts. Do you support the creation and ongoing movement of the specialty courts, and how do you envision the future involvement of the DA's office with the specialty courts?
The specialty courts are critical. Again, you go back to charging 3,000 defendants per year with felonies. At least a third or more than that are non-violent offenses of people who made mistakes. The system has to have an opportunity to curb recidivism in this parish. For those who commit a felony in Louisiana, they 50% commit another felony. Those who complete our specialty court programs, to which we are the gatekeeper of, only recidivate 8 to 12% of the time. The future is not, again, judge us by what we've done, not what we say we're going to do. What we're already doing in the DA's office is something called early intervention court that takes all of the specialty courts and ramps up the timing and how we identify someone. The system traditionally waited 60 days when reports got to the DA's office, a case was screened, it was charged, a defense attorney finally asked us after arraignment for a certain specialty court. We now identify these guys every other week based upon a profile that we've created, automatically bring them to Judge Schwartz's division and make them an offer and then protect their rights in a plea agreement to immediately place them in a specialty court, because it also costs you $30 a day to pretrial detain these individuals while we all make a decision that we know we're going to make, and now we're starting to make it within 2 weeks. That's being efficient. Within that same plea agreement, which is already created, this isn't fictitious, it's public record, we also incentivize defendants to go get a vocation. And within there, we'll ask them if they want to get a vocation and they don't have a history of crimes of violence, we'll let them earn a misdemeanor through our side MOUs with North Shore Technical Community College, to which funding is in place to help facilitate that if they also don't qualify for our diversion program. This is in place. That's the next step in the evolution in our specialty court programs. Under our administration, Mr. Montgomery's administration, we partnered with the court to create a veterans court. So we've been very much on the forefront of that. And I can tell you, anyone who actually practices felony law on a regular basis is aware of these programs, or should be, and they're not doing a good service to their client if they're not presenting these things as options within 2 weeks of arrest or the moment that they are retained. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Wynne.
Yes, I'm a huge proponent, and one of the things I've said on the campaign trail, specialty courts, we probably have the best, not only in Louisiana, but probably in the Southeast. And we have such great folks that were able to get those, Judge Garcia, Judge Childress, who were able to get these things off, and Judge Knight. And so they are wonderful tools that we as the DA can utilize to assist in dockets, because the dockets are very grossly overloaded right now. And so I'm a huge proponent of specialty courts. Obviously, if you have a client, which sometimes I do, that has issues with a DWI, or that is a felony, or someone who has drug addiction, you want to give them the tools that they need in order to become better citizens in our community. If we put them in jail, that is not a good use of our time and taxpayer dollars. I will say, it is not easy often to get your clients immediately into those programs. It takes upwards of 6 to 8, sometimes even longer. Again, I do practice criminal law, felony law. I had 60 cases last year. And so it's a very difficult process to work through that, to get approval. Remember what I said. The section DAs have no authority to approve those. Whatever is being said today is not correct. You have to get authority from either someone else in the office, meaning my opponent, or someone else sitting over at this table, in order to get that approval. And that is an absolute roadblock to getting these people who need treatment, who need to get into these programs and get themselves better. Thank you.
Thank you. This will be the 5th individual question. We'll start with Mr. Wynne. And again, this is something that you both have touched on. But what do you think is the most effective way to deal with low-level drug offenders and for repeats of nonviolent felony offenses?
One of the first things you can do as a DA, and I assume folks know what diversion is, pretrial intervention, it's the ability of the DAs to place individuals almost into a program within the office. It's internal probation, and you give them an opportunity to sign up for that. They do have to pay for it. I'd like to see the cost go down. It's very expensive right now, in order to have everybody have access, because I can tell you in Washington Parish, it is very, very expensive as well, and those folks just don't have the money, as well as in St. Tammany. So one thing you can do, obviously, is put people in diversion. One of the things that I did back when I was at the DA's office was isolate individuals that maybe needed some structure in their lives. And they were interested in doing something other than diversion. And so what we would do is put them into the military and make recommendations based upon whether or not they were actually going to qualify. And so we would recommend them and say, if you're interested, we will put you in the military programs as long as you qualify. And I'm a big proponent of that. It gives people structure. It gives them something else other than just saying, I'm in diversion. And so I think those are two really good avenues that you can utilize when you have low-level drug issues.
Thank you. Mr. Sims, 2 minutes.
Yes, sir. Again, we utilize diversion for those programs. We've actually met with faith-based and community service to do kind of a holistic approach to offering, especially youth, opportunities to go into faith-based programs. Again, getting the MOU with North Shore Technical Community College was critical for guys who don't have high school degrees, who need a vocation, maybe not going to college, because what we found is if you have nothing to lose, you're going to be a repeat offender. And so we're placing these offenders in these mentorship combined vocational programs through diversion and also making that a component of specialty court. I want to make a point real quick. And this is what distortion looks like. I invite every single one in this meeting to do a public records request from the district attorney's office about our plea agreement policy and see how long it's in place. It specifically talks about specialty courts and the autonomy that the individual DA's office, the DAs have to place people in specialty courts. It's in writing. If you don't know, you're not effectively doing your job because it's in writing. You want to run the district attorney's office, you want to sit in here and make allegations, please know the facts because I don't have to say it. Anyone in this room can look it up. It's all in writing. We have to be careful about what we're listening to. Those specialty courts are utilized for those offenders, I agree, to help get them on track. We have military diversion. We utilize that regularly as an alternative. And we have scholarship programs that Mr. Montgomery started to make sure that indigent individuals could afford the diversion program. It became, over time, too much of a pay to play. Under the old administration, they were making hundreds of thousands of dollars more off of individuals who were charged with criminal conduct that are likely indigent. Hundreds of thousands of dollars more. You're not allowed to make money off of diversion. That was a previous money-making internal component that my opponent said that he'll use internal means to make money. It's illegal. You can't do that. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. That brings us to the end of the individual questions, and now there are 6 lightning round questions. I asked Lacey if we could get some Jeopardy-style buzzers and see who could ring in first to answer, but apparently it wasn't on the budget, so we're just going to go alphabetically, okay? That means we'll start with Mr. Sims and then toggle back and forth from there, okay? Question number 1, do you support the use, this is a simple yes or no answer, please. Do you support the use of crisis intervention training for law enforcement officers to improve their ability to handle situations involving individuals with mental health challenges?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, that's both yes. Mr. Wynne, do you advocate for the use of body-worn cameras for law enforcement officers as a means to enhance transparency and accountability?
Absolutely, yes.
Yes.
Mr. Sims, do you believe the DA's office should be involved in community issues such as improving access to mental health treatment to decrease crisis?
Yes.
Yes.
Mr. Wynne, will you continue involvement in helping appropriate individuals access the many specialty courts the 22nd has to offer?
Yes.
Yes.
Mr. Sims, do you believe the DA's office should help to enhance programs aimed at preventing juvenile delinquency and supporting youth rehabilitation?
Yes.
Yes.
And the final lightning round question, I think is it Mr. Wynne? You're both familiar with former District Attorney Walter Reed's federal conviction and resulting prison sentence for money laundering, mail fraud, and wire fraud. If he offered it, would you accept support for your campaign from Mr. Reed?
No.
Absolutely not.
I think that's the end of the questions. So now we'll have closing candidate remarks, starting with Mr. Wynne. 2 minutes, sir.
Thank you very much. And as I've said today, I really would like to bring a different feel back to the DA's office. One of the things I've been preaching out in the community is access to that office. I think it's important for people in the community, not just politicians, not just people that are pastors, but everybody that has an issue with that office or has an issue in the community, that they have the right to come into that office and see me in Franklinton, in Bogalusa, down in Slidell, as well as over in Covington. And I think I want to bring a different feel to that office. Look, it's a state office. It is not a federal prosecution's office. We've got to get back to let our community of law enforcement do their job. Let them investigate crimes, and we prosecute. And so I'm here to tell you, as a businessman in this community for 26 years, I want to bring a difference to that office that I think someone who's operated a business, that's run a budget, that actually knows what it means to make payroll. And I'm going to lean up that office and make sure we're doing more with less. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Mr. Sims, the floor is yours.
I had the opportunity to work for a great man that fought for that office to make sure it never went backwards to a bunch of politicians and politicos who wanted to utilize that office as a place of power. You need to look at the candidates in this race. I am the only candidate that has spent his career as a federal and state prosecutor who's actually ever walked into a felony courtroom and tried a case for a felon for a crime. The 300 and something cases my opponent talks about are misdemeanors and tickets. He has never walked into a courtroom and personally picked a jury and handled a felony trial. And as a defense attorney for the last 18 years, he's not, of the 400 and something defendants, he has not defended a client in a jury trial setting either. Not one time. We have an office full of litigators and individuals that need to be led. And if you've never investigated crime, to which my opponent hasn't, if you've never put together grand jury investigations and worked with law enforcement and built task forces, state, federal, at a local level, held a little girl's hand, got her ready for trial, had to tell a parent when you can't do it, or evaluated all of these felony cases based upon your experience and actually utilizing the rules of evidence, and other prosecutors that look to you for guidance and advice, if you've not done that, you can't lead. You can't be a tough prosecutor if you've only done misdemeanors and tickets, because you don't know what it is to do this job, to feel it, to want to be impactful. That's the best thing I ever learned from Mr. Montgomery, was aspire to be impactful. My opponent says he built his law practice in 2006 when he left the DA's office. He built it the entire time he was working there. He did misdemeanors and tickets for Walter Reed and built a private practice on the side, and never, when had the opportunity, stepped in there to try to be impactful. We shouldn't want to be DA. Being DA doesn't matter. Doing the job, being impactful for your home, fighting for people, caring about what you do, converting a failing domestic violence department to a 87%, fighting for victims and fighting for you. This is your DA's office. You deserve an honest district attorney, and we should be telling you about what we've really done, not trying to fool you and make up our resumes, which my opponent has done. Thank you.
I think that brings us to the end of the forum.
Thank you very much for your time.
Remarks. My pleasure to be here, and I'll pass the microphone over to Thank you.
Thank you, Andy. That was great. You did a great job, and we really appreciate it. From the Chamber, we'd like to extend our gratitude to both of the candidates for their participation and their insight. Your willingness to serve our community is important, as was this dialogue, in helping the voters of St. Tammany make an informed decision. I also want to thank the members of the community who have joined us today, whether in person or via the video that will be posted on our Chamber YouTube channel. One of our main Chamber goals this year is to facilitate the exchange of information between the stakeholders in our community. Your participation underscores the significance of these discussions and the impact they have on shaping the future of St. Tammany. Thank you again to both of our candidates, and best wishes to each of you as you continue your campaign. And with that, we're adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you.